My son left for work one morning 25 years ago and never returned. The police found his car abandoned near the river gorge after what they suspected was a fatal accident, but they never recovered a body. We buried an empty casket, and I spent 2 decades mourning a ghost while his wife played the grieving widow. But yesterday, while eating cold potato soup in the basement of the house I paid for, I saw a face on the 6 News that stopped my heart. It was a billionaire real estate tycoon in Seattle cutting the ribbon on a new office tower. He had a different name and expensive clothes, but when the camera zoomed in, I saw the crescent-shaped scar on his chin. I gave him that scar, stitching him up on our kitchen table when he was 10 years old. That was my son. He was alive. And when I screamed for his wife, she didn't look surprised. She looked terrified. That was the moment I realized my entire life was a lie constructed by the 2 people I loved most. My name is Albert Bradford. I am 73 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have lived in the damp, dark basement of my own home. My daughter-in-law, Monica, tells the neighbors she is a saint for taking care of her senile father-in-law. She tells them I am confused, that my mind is slipping, and that I need constant supervision. But the truth is much simpler. I am in the way. I am a budget line item she wants to erase. The basement is cold and smells of mildew. It has one small window near the ceiling that lets in just enough light to tell me if it is day or night. My dinner that evening was potato soup again. It was lukewarm and tasteless because Monica says salt is bad for my blood pressure. I think she just hopes I will lose my appetite and fade away faster. I sat in my worn-out armchair, the only piece of furniture she let me keep from my old life, and turned on the small television set. It is my only window to the outside world. Monica controls the cable box upstairs, so I have to watch whatever she thinks is appropriate for a man she claims has dementia. Usually it is cartoons or old reruns, but tonight she must have slipped up because the local news was on. I was absent-mindedly stirring my soup, not really paying attention, until the anchor announced a special report from Seattle. A new technology and real estate conglomerate called Fontaine Enterprises was breaking ground on a billion-dollar tower. The reporter was breathless with excitement, talking about the visionary CEO who had come from nowhere to dominate the market. Then the camera cut to the podium. A man in a bespoke Navy suit stepped up to the microphone. The graphics on the screen read Julian Fontaine, CEO. He looked distinguished, with silver at his temples and the kind of confidence that only extreme wealth can buy. He smiled at the crowd and began to speak about legacy and building the future. My spoon clattered into the bowl, splashing soup onto my lap. I didn't feel the heat. I couldn't breathe. The voice was deeper and more refined, but the cadence was identical. The way he tilted his head to the left when he paused. The way he gripped the sides of the podium. It was Julian. My Julian. My brain tried to reject it. Grief does strange things to a parent. I have seen my son in the faces of strangers 1,000 times over the last 25 years. I have chased young men down the street because they had his walk or his hair color, only to apologize like a crazy old man when they turned around. But this was different. The camera pushed in for a tight shot of his face as he laughed at a joke from the mayor, and there it was. On the left side of his chin, just below the lip, was a thin white line curved like a crescent moon. It was a jagged scar. He got it when he was 10 years old, trying to jump his bicycle over a creek in our backyard. He had smashed his chin on a rock. We didn't have health insurance back then, so I cleaned it with rubbing alcohol and stitched it up myself with a sewing needle and fishing line while he squeezed my hand and tried not to cry. No 2 scars are identical. That was my handiwork. That was my son. He wasn't dead. He was Julian Fontaine. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over. I rushed to the television, my hands shaking so hard I could barely touch the screen. I traced the line of his jaw. He was older, he looked harder, but he was alive. He had been alive this whole time. While I wept over an empty grave, while I paid for his memorial service, while I comforted his weeping wife, he was building an empire in Seattle. "Monica," I screamed. It was a guttural sound I didn't recognize. "Monica, get down here." I heard heavy footsteps above me. Then the door at the top of the stairs flew open. Monica descended, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden steps. She was wearing her tennis outfit and a look of pure irritation. She hated being interrupted, especially during her evening glass of wine. "What is it?" Albert, she snapped, standing at the bottom of the stairs with her hands on her hips. You spilled your soup. I am not cleaning that up. You are behaving like a child. I ignored her. I pointed a trembling finger at the television screen. Look at him. Monica rolled her eyes and turned toward the TV. She started to say something dismissive, probably about how I shouldn't get worked up over the news, but the words died in her throat. I watched her face closely. I saw the blood drain from her cheeks. Her eyes went wide, and her mouth opened slightly. It wasn't the confusion of someone who didn't understand. It was the shock of someone who had been caught. For a split second, the mask of the grieving widow slipped, and I saw the cold calculation underneath. She recognized him instantly. That is Julian, I said. My voice raspy. That is my son. He is alive, Monica. Look at the scar. She stared at the screen for another second, her mind clearly racing. Then she snapped into action. She lunged for the remote control that was sitting on the said table. Give me that, she hissed. She pressed the power button hard. The screen went black. The image of my son vanished, leaving only our reflections in the dark glass. My reflection was a disheveled old man. Hers was a woman caught in a lie. Turn it back on, I demanded, stepping toward her. I need to hear him. I need to know why. Stop it, Albert, Monica shouted, using that condescending tone she reserved for doctors and neighbors. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, her tennis racket bag slung over her shoulder, looking at me as if I were a piece of rotting wood. You are having an episode again. This is exactly what Dr. Finch warned us about. You are hallucinating. I am not hallucinating, I roared, my voice echoing off the damp concrete walls. That was Julian. He has the scar, Monica. The crescent-shaped scar I gave him. He is Julian Fontaine. I saw his name on the screen. Monica stepped back, her face hardening into a cold stone mask. There is no Julian Fontaine, Albert. That was just a random man on the news. Julian died 25 years ago. We buried him. Do you remember the funeral? Do you remember the empty casket? Your mind is playing tricks on you. It is the dementia. It is getting worse. She was gaslighting me, making me question my memory, my sanity, my reality. She had been doing it for 5 years, ever since she convinced me to move down here. But this time I had seen the truth, and it was sharper than any knife. I know what I saw, I whispered, stepping toward her. And I saw your face, Monica. You knew. You weren't surprised that he looked like Julian. You were scared because I saw it. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and marched to the utility sink where the small medicine cabinet was mounted. She unlocked it with the key she kept on a chain around her neck. She took out the orange bottle, the heavy sedatives that made my thoughts feel like they were wading through molasses. You need to calm down, she said, shaking 2 orange pills into her palm. Take these now. I backed against the cold concrete wall. No, I am not taking them. I need to call the police. I need to call the station in Seattle. Monica laughed, a dry, brittle sound. Call the police with what, Albert? I took the landline out last week, and you don't have a phone. Who are they going to believe? A wealthy widow or a senile old man who lives in a basement and sees ghosts on the television? She closed the distance, grabbed my jaw with her cold fingers, her nails digging into my skin. Take the pills, Albert, or do I have to call the orderlies from Sunny Meadows tonight? They have a bed ready for you in the memory care ward. Sunny Meadows was a converted warehouse on the edge of town where the state dumped the unwanted to rot in hallways that smelled of bleach. It was her ultimate threat. I let her shove the pills onto my tongue, drank the water, and pretended to swallow. Good, she said, pocketing the remote. She paused at the stairs, looking back. Never say that name again. If you mention Julian Fontaine to anyone, I will have you committed before breakfast. Do you understand? She walked up and locked the deadbolt. Once her footsteps faded, I spat the pills and flushed them down the utility sink. I had hidden them under my tongue. I wasn't crazy. I was a forensic auditor for 40 years. I spent a lifetime finding patterns in numbers. My son was alive, he was a billionaire, and the woman upstairs knew exactly where he was. I sat in the dark, my mind clear. I was going to war. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles. My mind was a whirlwind of memories, spinning back 25 years. I thought of my other son, Philip. He was 2 years younger than Julian, a quiet boy who inherited my love for details. Julian was always the charismatic one, but he envied the quiet trust I had in Philip. Then came that terrible night. Our family furniture warehouse went up in flames. Philip was inside, working late on the quarterly audit. The police ruled it a faulty wire, but the fire devoured my boy. The next day, Julian's car was found abandoned at the river gorge with a suicide note. We buried an empty casket, believing Julian killed himself out of guilt. My wife died of a broken heart a year later. I was left alone with Monica, Julian's widow of 2 years. I paid off the house mortgage and let her handle the logistics. I remember reviewing the warehouse insurance files back then. The numbers never made sense. The warehouse was undervalued and some ledger files were missing from the safe. But I was too grief-stricken to care. 5 years ago, Monica convinced me to move into the basement to rent the upper rooms for Audrey's nursing school. I agreed, wanting to help my granddaughter. What a fool I was. At dawn, I heard the garage door opener. I waited for a Mercedes engine to start, but it remained silent. She was sitting in her car in the closed garage, the only place she thought was soundproof. I crept up the wooden stairs, placing my feet on the quiet edges. I reached the door. It was locked, but there was a gap at the bottom. I pressed my ear to the cold wood and listened. Monica's voice rose, sharp and panicked. "He saw you, Julian." He recognized the scar. My heart stopped. She was calling him Julian, accepting his new identity. "I tried to tell him he was hallucinating," she hissed. "I gave him the heavy dose, but he is not buying it. He is fighting back. He mentioned the police." There was a pause as she listened. "No, we cannot just wait," she snapped. "He is dangerous, Julian. If he talks, your IPO and reputation go up in smoke. We have to accelerate the timeline." Accelerate the timeline. The words hung like a guillotine. "Yes, Sunny Meadows," she whispered. "It is cheap, dirty, and they don't ask questions. Once he is in their lockdown unit, he will never get out. He'll just be another babbling old man. I will handle the doctor this afternoon." I backed down the stairs, gripping the railing. Sunny Meadows was a warehouse of despair. That was their solution, to bury me alive so they could keep their millions. I had to get out. I had to run. I scrambled down the stairs, throwing myself into the armchair just seconds before I heard the lock turn. Monica pushed the door open, her heels clicking sharply. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face, checking if the heavy dose from last night had turned me into a vegetable. "We need to talk about your living arrangements," she said, her voice shifting into that sick, sweet tone. "I've been thinking about your episode last night. It's too dangerous for you to be here alone. You're seeing things, Albert." "I am not a threat, Monica," I said, keeping my face slack, playing the defeated old man. "This is my house. I paid for it." "For now," she smiled. "But we have a meeting with Dr. Finch this afternoon. Considering your violent behavior last night, he will agree you need 24-hour care. Once he signs those papers, the state will grant me guardianship. I will sell this house, liquidate your accounts, and move to Seattle. You will stay at Sunny Meadows until the end." She leaned in close, her perfume smelling of lilies and rot. "Oh, and speaking of care, it's time for your morning medicine. You missed your first dose because you were sleeping." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a different bottle. She shook 2 pills into her hand. They were blue this time, stronger. "Open up," she commanded. I let my shoulders slump, giving her the look of defeat she wanted. I opened my mouth, let her place the pills on my tongue, and swallowed the water she handed me. I made a show of the effort, but as soon as she turned around to look at the empty glass, I slid the pills into the pocket of my cheek, tucked deep between my gums and the soft tissue. "Good," she said, patting my shoulder. "Pack a small bag, Albert. The transport van will be here tomorrow morning at 8. Tomorrow morning. I had less than 24 hours. I heard her lock the door and walk up the stairs. Once the garage door opened and her Mercedes finally rumbled down the driveway, I ran to the utility sink and spat the blue pills down the drain, watching them wash away. My hands were shaking, but my head was clear. They thought they had won. They thought I was a confused old man who would go quietly, but they had forgotten who I used to be. I was the man who found the hidden assets in the Enron investigation. I was the man who traced illicit funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I walked to the corner of the basement where my old filing cabinet sat rusting under a tarp. Monica had gone through it years ago looking for money, but she had only looked at the files. She hadn't looked at the cabinet itself. I reached behind the bottom drawer and felt for the metal latch I had installed 30 years ago. It clicked. The false bottom of the drawer popped up. Inside was my old lockpicking kit from my days with the fraud unit, and a prepaid burner phone I had hidden 5 years ago. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life with 15% battery. It was enough. I wasn't going to Sunny Meadows. I was going to find the evidence. I pulled the lockpick set from the cabinet. The metal picks felt cold and familiar. Kneeling before the basement door, I inserted the tension wrench in the rake. My hands were stiff with arthritis and trembling with rage, but muscle memory took over. I visualized the pins inside the cylinder. Click, click. A resisting grind, then the sweet, smooth rotation of the plug. The door swung open. I stepped into the kitchen. The house was quiet, smelling of citrus cleaner and the stale scent of lies. I didn't waste time. I went straight to the second floor, to the room that used to be my study. Monica had claimed it 5 years ago, turning it into her office. She kept the door locked always. It was a keypad lock. But Monica was a creature of habit, and she was arrogant. She used the same 4-digit code for everything. 1997, the year she married Julian. I punched it in. The light turned green. The room was unrecognizable, but I wasn't here for the furniture. I went straight to the wall, behind the oversized painting of a storm at sea. I knew the safe was there because I installed it 30 years ago. Monica had changed the combination, but she didn't know about the manufacturer override key slot under the digital pad, or the master key I had kept, taped under a floorboard in the hall closet since 1995. I retrieved the key from the floorboard and inserted it. The heavy steel door of the safe swung open with a soft groan. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I ignored the stacks of cash and the velvet jewelry boxes. I reached for the back of the safe, pulling out a thick manila envelope that sat in the shadows. It wasn't labeled. I dumped the contents onto the glass desk. Papers slid out, bank statements, but not from our local branch. These were from a private bank in the Cayman Islands. The account holder was Monica Bradford. I scanned the columns, my auditor eyes processing the data. Every month on the first, like clockwork, there was a deposit. $50,000. The sender was Fontaine Enterprises, Seattle, WA. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. $50,000 a month. That was the price of her silence. That was the hush money my son paid to keep his past dead. She wasn't just surviving on his life insurance. She was on his payroll. Under the statements, there was a bundle of postcards held together by a rubber band. The edges were worn. I snapped the band and fanned them out. They were all picture postcards from Seattle. I turned one over. The handwriting was jagged and rushed, but familiar. Happy 16th birthday, Audrey. I hope you got the car. Study hard. It was signed simply, Dad. Another one. Happy graduation. I am proud of you. They were addressed to my granddaughter Audrey, but they had no postmarks. They had never been mailed. Monica had intercepted them, keeping them in the safe. Why? Leverage. Proof that Julian existed, just in case the checks ever stopped coming. Julian had been writing to his daughter for years. He knew she existed. He watched her from a distance, sending money and cards while I rotted in the basement, believing he was dead. I was so absorbed in the betrayal, so lost in the paper trail of my own erasing, that I didn't hear the front door open downstairs. I didn't hear the light footsteps on the stairs. Audrey stood in the doorway, frozen. She was wearing her light blue scrubs, her nurse's bag slipping from her shoulder, her breathing fast. We used to build model planes in this very room when she was 7, and she was always the only person in this family who looked at me with genuine warmth, not pity. Now her eyes were wide, darting from my face to the open safe, then to the documents scattered across the glass desk. She looked terrified, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. "What are you doing, Grandpa?" she whispered, taking a slow step back. "Mom said she said you were getting worse. She said you might get violent." I stood up slowly, raising my hands to show they were empty. I knew how I looked. My hair was wild, my face pale, my clothes stained with the grime of the basement. I looked like the madman Monica claimed I was. "Audrey, listen to me," I said, my voice raspy and cracking. "I am not crazy, I am not violent. Your mother has been lying to you. She has been lying to both of us. She reached into her pocket and I saw the metal glint of her cell phone. She was going to call Monica. If she made that call, it was over. The orderlies from Sunny Meadows would be here in minutes, and I would be dragged away in straps. Please don't call her, I pleaded, taking a cautious step forward. Just look. Look at this. I grabbed the stack of postcards and the bank statement, holding them out. My hand was trembling, not from age, but from the desperate hope that she would believe me. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. Grandpa, you need to go back to your room. You're confused. Audrey, look at the postcards, I said, my voice desperate. They are addressed to you. They are from your father. That stopped her. She froze, her eyes locking onto the worn paper in my hand. My father is dead, she said, her voice hard, though I could hear it wobble. He died in a car accident before I was old enough to remember him. He didn't die, I said. He is Julian Fontaine. He lives in Seattle, and he sends your mother $50,000 every single month to keep his existence a secret. Read them. I saw the conflict war in her face. The name Julian Fontaine was known to everyone in the state. He was the billionaire tycoon on the evening news. I placed the postcards on the corner of the desk nearest to her. Just read them, I whispered. If I'm senile, then these are just the scribbles of a crazy old man. But if I'm right... Slowly, warily, she stepped into the room. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the top card. I watched her face crumble as she read the words. She turned it over, looking at the picture of the Seattle Space Needle. She picked up another, then another. He knew my birthday, she whispered, a tear escaping and trailing down her cheek. This is his handwriting. I've seen it on the back of my baby photos. But Mom told me. She told you he was a ghost, I said gently. Because as long as we think he's dead, she gets the money and I get locked in the basement. She picked up the bank statement next. Her eyes scanned the deposits, the routing numbers, the name of Fontaine Enterprises. The sheer scale of the betrayal seemed to crush her. She dropped the papers. They scattered across the glass. This is horrible, she whispered, looking at the open safe then back at me. She signed the papers this morning, Grandpa. She told me it was the only way to keep you safe. She said you were a danger to yourself. I am only a danger to her secret, Audrey, I said. And now, so are you. Before she could answer, the sharp, distinctive scrape of tires on the gravel driveway cut through the silence. Then came the heavy mechanical rumble of the garage door opening, vibrating through the floorboards. Monica was back early from her meeting. Audrey's face lost all its remaining color. Panic flared in Audrey's eyes. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly tight. She's here. If she finds you up here, if she sees the safe, she will make sure I never speak again, I finished for her. I have to leave. You can't just walk out, Audrey cried. You have no money, no phone, no car. Where will you go? I am going to Seattle, I said. I am going to find Julian. Audrey didn't hesitate. She reached into her purse, pulled out her leather wallet, and took out a sleek black credit card. Take this, she said, pressing it into my palm. It's a supplementary card attached to Mom's account. She uses it for my tuition, but she never checks the minor charges. The pin is your birthday. Just run. I looked at my granddaughter, holding the plastic card. For the first time in a quarter of a century, I felt the actual warmth of a real family. Not the toxic burden I had carried for so long. I saw the integrity and courage in her eyes, the exact qualities my son Julian had discarded when he traded his soul for Fontaine Enterprises. Thank you, Audrey, I said. I grabbed the bank statement and the postcard from her 16th birthday, shoving them into my pocket. Go, she urged, pushing me toward the back door of the study. She's coming up the stairs. I scrambled out the window, dropping onto the wooden trellis. The vines scraped my face, and my ankles screamed in pain as I hit the grass below, but I didn't stop. I ran through the neighbor's hedge and darted down the narrow alleyway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back. I had the evidence, I had the means, and for the first time in years, I had a destination. I ran until the burning in my lungs eclipsed the pain in my ankles. The alleyways behind our subdivision were a maze of overgrown hedges and rotting wooden fences, but I knew them by heart. I used to walk these paths with Henry, my old golden retriever, years ago. before Monica decided he was too messy and gave him away while I was at a doctor's appointment. I kept to the shadows, ducking behind garbage bins every time headlights swept across the intersections. I wasn't just running from my house anymore. I was running from a life sentence in a concrete cell. I reached the Interstate Transit Center just as the sun began to sink below the horizon, bleeding purple and bruised black across the sky. The transit center was a grimy concrete island smelling of diesel fumes and desperation. It was the perfect cover for a man trying to disappear. I pulled my faded baseball cap low over my eyes and approached the automated ticket kiosk. My fingers hovered over the glass screen. I punched in a route. Portland first, then Seattle. I didn't want a direct ticket. If Monica called the police, a direct ticket to Seattle would be too easy to trace. I swiped Audrey's black card. The machine whirred and my chest tightened as I waited for the display to change. A pro of the ticket printed with a loud, rasping sound. I grabbed it, pocketing the card that was currently my only lifeline, and boarded the first bus heading north. I took a seat in the very back, right next to the chemical toilet. The smell of disinfectant was strong enough to make my eyes water, but it was the only place where I felt hidden from the other passengers. As the bus rumbled onto the highway, I watched the streetlights of my hometown fade into the distance. For a brief moment, I thought I was safe. I thought I had a head start, but I had underestimated Monica. 3 hours later, the bus pulled into a highway rest stop, a brightly lit oasis of fast food and overpriced gasoline in the middle of nowhere. The driver announced a 20-minute layover. My stomach was cramping with hunger. I hadn't eaten anything since the tasteless, lukewarm potato soup the night before. I needed coffee to keep my mind sharp. I walked into the convenience store, keeping my head down. I grabbed a plastic-wrapped sandwich and a large black coffee from the burner. I walked to the counter and handed the food to the cashier, a teenager with a bored expression who didn't even look at me. I swiped the black card, declined. The cashier sighed, tapping the register. "Try it again, Pops." I swiped it again, slower this time. The red light on the reader blinked, declined. My stomach dropped. Cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Monica had found out. She must have checked her phone notifications for the card activity, or Audrey had been forced to talk. Either way, she had killed my account. I fumbled in my pockets, pretending to search for cash I knew I didn't have. "Hey, look at the screen," someone by the slushy machine muttered. I looked up. Mounted in the corner above the beverage rack was a television tuned to the local 24-hour news station. A red banner at the bottom of the screen flashed in bold letters. "Silver, alerts," and there, right above the text, was my face. It was a photo from 10 years ago, taken at my retirement party. I was smiling in the picture, holding a silver plaque, looking healthy and sane. But the anchor's voice, booming through the store's speakers, painted a very different picture. "State police have issued a silver alert for 73-year-old Albert Bradford," the anchor announced. He was reported missing from his home this afternoon. Family members state that Mr. Bradford suffers from advanced dementia and is severely disoriented. Police warn that he has a history of violent outbursts and may be a danger to himself and others. If you see him, do not approach. Call 911 immediately. Violent, hallucinating, a danger. Monica had played her final card. She wasn't just searching for a runaway father-in-law, she was hunting a fugitive. She had turned the entire state into her personal search party. I could feel eyes turning toward me. The teenage cashier looked from the television screen, then slowly looked down at my face. His eyes narrowed, his posture straightening. "Hey," he said, his voice rising. "You look kind of like—" I didn't let him finish the sentence. I dropped the sandwich, turned, and walked out the glass doors. I wanted to run, but running would only confirm his suspicions. I forced my stiff legs to move at a brisk, steady pace. Behind me, I heard the cashier call out to the manager. I ducked around the side of the convenience store, avoiding the bright lights of the gas pumps in the bus loading zone. I couldn't go back to the bus now. The driver would have heard the alert, and the passengers would be watching. I was stranded at a highway rest stop, 80 miles from home, with no money, no card, and a face that was now public enemy number one. I hid behind a stack of wooden pallets near the commercial dumpsters, shivering as the night air turned frigid. My thin jacket did nothing to block the wind. I sat on the cold concrete, my knees pulled to my chest, trying to think. I was a forensic auditor. I solved complex financial puzzles. I found assets where there were none. I had to look at my own resources. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, the burner phone with 15% battery, and the watch on my left wrist. I looked down at it. It was a Rolex Submariner. I had bought it for myself in 1998, the year I made partner at the firm. It was stainless steel, heavy and scratched from decades of daily wear, but the movement inside was Swiss perfection. It was worth at least $5,000. Monica hadn't stripped it from me, probably because she assumed a senile old man's watch was a cheap knockoff. Across the highway, past the bright lights of the gas station, was a row of low-slung commercial buildings. One of them had a neon sign that buzzed and flickered in the dark. "We buy gold." It was a massive risk. Pawn shops are required to report transactions to the police, and they check IDs. But I had no other choice. If I stayed here, the state troopers would find me before morning. I took a deep breath, rubbed the dirt off my face, and stepped out from the shadows. The pawn shop smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. The broker was built like an old vending machine, thick-necked, bald, with calculating eyes that immediately assessed my disheveled clothes. He didn't see a retired professional. He saw a thief looking for a quick payout. "Help you?" He grunted, not looking up from a brass ring he was polishing. I unclasped the heavy watch from my left wrist and placed it on the scratched glass counter. "I need cash," I said, keeping my voice steady. He picked it up, feeling the weight. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a jeweler's loupe, and examined the bezel, the sweeping second hand, and the serial number. "Nice piece," he said, looking up at me, his face unreadable. "Stolen? It's mine," I replied, holding his gaze. "I've owned it since 1998. I have the original box and registration papers back home, but my car broke down on the highway tonight, and I need to get to my family. I need cash." He laughed, a wet, hacking sound that ended in a cough. "Sure, Pops. Look, I don't care where you got it. But without the papers, it's a huge risk for me. If the cops run the serial number and it comes back hot, I'm out of pocket. Risk tax. I can give you $400. My jaw tightened. $400. This watch is worth $5,000, easily, even in this condition. "Then take it back to the city and sell it for $5,000, the broker said, dropping the watch back onto the counter with a metallic click. "But out here, at midnight with no ID and a missing car story, $400 is the price. Take it or leave it." I looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner, then back at his phone. The silver alert was broadcasting all over the state. If he took my ID, he would see my name. If he logged the watch tonight, the police database would flag it instantly. I had to pay for discretion. "I'll take $500, I said, leaning in. "But you don't enter it into the system until tomorrow morning. Give me a 12-hour window." The broker narrowed his eyes, calculating the profit margin versus the risk. The watch was a guaranteed moneymaker, and a 12-hour delay on the police log was a minor infraction he committed regularly for the right clientele. He grunted, reached into the register, and counted out 5 greasy $100 bills. "Deal," he said, sliding the cash across the counter. "Now get out of my shop before I change my mind." I grabbed the money, pocketed it, and walked back out into the cold night. The weight of the bills in my pocket felt like both victory and a defeat. I had sold the last symbol of my successful career. The watch I had worn to boards and family dinners for a fraction of its value. But it was the fuel I needed to keep moving. My next stop was a 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks down the road. I kept my hat low, avoiding the security cameras at the entrance. I walked the aisles quickly, grabbing a box of jet black hair dye, a disposable razor, a can of shaving cream, and a pair of cheap plastic reading glasses from a display rack. I paid with one of the $100 bills, receiving my change in small bills. I found a public restroom in a small park a few blocks away. It was a filthy concrete structure, smelling of damp earth and neglect. The fluorescent light bulb overhead buzzed like a hornet, flickering and throwing long shadows. The mirror above the sink was cracked and stained with water spots under the harsh, yellow light. I looked at my reflection, Albert Bradford, the victim. The senile old man who was supposed to rot in a basement. I stripped off my jacket and shirt, shivering in the drafty room. I mixed the dye in the plastic tray, my hands shaking slightly, and began to lather the dark paste into my white hair and beard. The chemical odor was sharp, stinging my eyes, but I forced myself to wait the full 15 minutes, listening to the drip of the broken faucet. I washed the dye out in the cold sink water, using a paper towel to scrub the stains from my forehead and ears. When I looked back into the mirror, my hair was a stark, unnatural black, but it immediately changed the shape and age of my face. Next, I lathered the shaving cream over my beard. I had worn a beard for 40 years, since before Julian was born. With the disposable razor, I began to shave it off. The blade was cheap, dragging against my skin, but I didn't care about the small cuts. When I was finished, I washed my face and put on the cheap reading glasses. A stranger looked back at me. The glasses broke up the outline of my eyes, and the bare chin revealed the hard, angular jawline I had hidden for decades. Albert Bradford was gone. In his place was a grim, determined man who looked like he had nothing left to lose. I walked back to the bus transit center, but I avoided the ticket windows and the security guards. Instead, I bypassed the main terminal and walked directly to the outdoor loading bays where the long-distance coaches parked. I spotted a bus with its engine idling, the destination board displaying Seattle Express. The driver was standing near the luggage bay, taking a drag from a cigarette. I approached him, keeping my hands in my pockets. "Are you taking cash passengers?" I asked. He looked at my black hair, my glasses, and my worn clothes. "Tickets are sold inside, partner. Kiosk is open." I pulled a $100 bill from my pocket, letting him see the green ink in the dim light of the loading bay. "The machine inside is acting up," I said, offering the bill. "Just need a seat in the back." The driver looked at the bill, then glanced around the empty platform. He took the money, slid it into his pocket with a smooth, practiced motion, and tossed his cigarette onto the asphalt. "Machine is broken inside," he agreed with a quick wink. "Go on up. Keep your head down and stay in the back row." I climbed the steps into the warm, dimly lit cabin. The bus was mostly empty, with only a few passengers sleeping against the windows. I walked to the very back, taking a corner seat. As the bus engine roared and the coach merged onto the highway heading north, I touched my pocket, feeling the stiff paper of the Cayman bank statement. Monica had declared war. She had branded me a lunatic, but she had forgotten that a cornered man is the most dangerous opponent of all. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the tires carry me toward Seattle. Seattle was a city of glass and steel rising from the gray Puget Sound mist like a monument to cold ambition. It was raining when the bus hissed to a stop at the depot, a relentless, icy drizzle that soaked through my thin jacket the moment I stepped onto the wet asphalt. During the 6-hour bus ride, while the other passengers slept, I had sat under the dim overhead bulb, staring at the Cayman Islands bank statements. I did the math in my head. A deposit of $50,000 every month for 25 years. That was $600,000 a year, totaling $15 million in hush money. A fortune paid to keep a father in a basement. I had $400 left in my pocket, no identification, and a face that was plastered on every local news station in Oregon due to the silver alert. But here, in the shadow of the Space Needle, nobody looked twice at a weary old man with dyed black hair and cheap reading glasses. I wasn't Albert Bradford anymore. I was just another invisible soul in a city that only noticed success. The wind blowing off Elliott Bay smelled of salt water and exhaust fumes, biting through my wet clothes as I walked toward the financial district. My bad knees throbbed with every step, but I didn't stop. Fontaine Tower was impossible to miss. It pierced the Seattle skyline, a 60-story jagged shard of obsidian reflecting the low-hanging clouds. The launch gala for Fontaine Enterprises' new headquarters and their upcoming initial public offering was tonight. I saw the massive glossy posters plastered on construction barricades along the sidewalk. It was a black tie, invite-only event for the city's financial elite. The kind of place where a ticket cost more than my annual pension. I didn't need a ticket, though. I just needed a way inside that didn't require an invitation. I spent the morning watching the service entrance at the back of the building. I observed the rhythm of the place, the coming and going of the catering trucks, the florists delivering oversized arrangements, and the cleaning crews. Security at the front doors was tight, with guards checking digital invitations against a list, but the loading dock was a different story. It was a hub of chaotic activity, with people in uniforms rushing to get everything ready. I followed a commercial laundry van to a side street 3 blocks away. The driver parked in an alley, leaving the back doors of the van open while he went inside a building to sign a delivery manifest. I saw my chance. Hanging on a rack inside the van was a row of fresh facility uniforms. I reached in and grabbed a gray polyester jumpsuit with a generic facility maintenance logo on the chest and a plastic ID badge clipped to the pocket. The badge had the name Bill printed on it. It was theft, but I reasoned that my son owed me far more than the cost of a work uniform. I changed in the cramped stall of a public restroom down the street, pulling the jumpsuit directly over my street clothes. It smelled of industrial detergent and someone else's dried sweat. The gray fabric was stiff, but it was the perfect disguise. When I looked in the mirror, the hard-faced man with dyed black hair and cheap reading glasses looked exactly like a man who spent his life fixing boilers or mopping floors. I clipped the badge onto my chest like a shield. I walked back to the Fontaine Tower garage, finding a service entrance that led to the freight elevators. Near the loading dock, a janitor's cart sat unattended, complete with a mop bucket, chemical spray bottles, and a roll of plastic trash bags. I grabbed the handle and pushed. I kept my head down, moving with the slow, shuffling gait of a man who was paid by the hour to be invisible. A security guard in a fancy black blazer with the Fontaine logo stood by the service elevator, scrolling on his phone. As I pushed the cart past him, I muttered, "Maintenance for the 50th floor," without making eye contact. He didn't even look up from his screen. He just waved his hand, letting me pass. The freight elevator ride up to the 50th floor was the longest elevator ride of my life. The steel walls felt like a trash compactor, and my heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I could feel the bruises from the basement floor, my knees aching from the damp cold. When the elevator doors finally slid apart, the noise hit me first. It was a wall of sound. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the low hum of expensive conversation, and the soft, elegant thrum of a live string quartet. The ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers. I pushed my janitor's cart along the perimeter of the room, hugging the wood-paneled walls, keeping close to the shadows, and then I saw him. He was standing in the very center of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of admirers. He held a glass of champagne like a scepter. Julian Fontaine, my son, he looked regal. His bespoke navy suit fit him like a second skin, draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. He threw his head back and laughed at something a woman in a red dress said. It was the same laugh that used to fill our small kitchen when I made pancakes on Sunday mornings, the same throw of the head, the same crinkle around his eyes. The sound of it made my knees weak. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to grab his lapels, shake him, and scream his real name. I wanted to ask him how he could let me rot in a basement while he lived like a king. But I forced myself to grip the plastic handle of the mop bucket. I breathed through the panic, letting the cold auditor's brain take over. I watched him for an hour. I watched him charm wealthy investors, shake hands with local politicians, and bask in the adoration of the crowd. He was a king in his castle, and I was the ghost haunting the halls of his empire. I watched Julian for another 10 minutes. Finally, he handed his empty crystal flute to a passing waiter, leaned in to whisper something to a massive security guard with a coiled earpiece, and walked toward the quiet hallway marked VIP restrooms. This was the moment, the chance I had run 80 miles for. I pushed my janitor's cart into the hallway, parking it directly across the heavy oak door of the men's restroom to block it slightly. I hung a yellow wet floor sign on the handle. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely clasp the plastic sign. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic beating of my heart, and pushed the door open. The restroom was silent and opulent, lined with gray granite and gold fixtures. Julian stood at the mirror adjusting his tie. He glanced at my reflection as I entered, his expression turning to one of immediate dismissal. "We're closed in here, partner," he said, not even turning around to look at me. "Come back in 10 minutes." I didn't leave. Instead, I reached behind me, turned the heavy brass latch, and locked the door. The loud click of the lock echoed off the marble walls. Julian's reflection frowned. He let go of his tie and turned around slowly, his chest puffed out under his tailored jacket. I said, "Get out. Can you not hear?" I walked forward until I was standing just 5 feet from him, directly under the bright recessed lights. I looked into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the boy I had mourned for 25 years. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice raspy. He froze, his gaze sweeping over my face. The dyed black hair, the cheap glasses, and the gray jumpsuit. For a second, there was only confusion. Then, the recognition dawned. It didn't come with guilt or relief. His face simply settled into cold, arrogant annoyance. "You look terrible, Dad," he said, his voice flat. "That hair dye is tragic." I felt the breath leave my lungs. No apology, no explanation, just contempt. "You are alive," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You let us bury an empty casket. You let your mother die of a broken heart, thinking her eldest son was dead." "Mom had a heart condition, Dad. She was going to die anyway. I just gave her something dramatic to focus on. It saved her from a slow decline." I stepped back, my hand gripping the marble sink. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you do it? We loved you. You gave me mediocrity," he spat, tossing the crumpled towel. His voice was laced with bitter resentment. "You used to save rubber bands and reuse tea bags, Dad. You audited other people's millions and went home to a house that smelled of boiled potatoes. I refused to live a life that small. So you killed yourself," I said, my voice hardening. "You drove your car to the gorge." "I parked my car by the gorge," Julian corrected, a smug smile touching his lips. "I took a bus to Seattle, and I took the $2,000 Susan life insurance payout that Monica collected. It was my seed money. The only useful thing you ever provided for me." "The money," I whispered. "It always came back to the money." "And Monica, she knew the whole time." "Of course she knew," Julian said, adjusting his cuffs. "Monica is a visionary. She saw my potential when you didn't. She stayed behind to manage the logistics, to keep you quiet, and to filter the funds until Fontaine Enterprises was large enough. She sacrificed a lot for this." "She tried to put me in a home," I said, my anger rising. "She drugged me and locked me in my own basement." "Because you became a liability," Julian said calmly. "You were supposed to quietly live out your days in the basement, Albert. But you had to start asking questions and looking at old warehouse statements. You became expensive. Now look at you, crashing my gala, looking like a street person." He stepped toward me, towering over me. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the boy whose chin I had stitched up, was gone. Standing in front of me was a predator in a bespoke suit. "You are a monster," I said. "I am a billionaire," he countered. "And you are a trespassing janitor. Who do you think the world is going to believe?" He pulled out his phone and pressed speed dial. "Mike, get in here. A homeless man got into the VIP restroom. He's harassing me." He hung up, smiling coldly. "You should have stayed in the basement, Dad. The soup was free." The heavy oak door rattled, and then the lock shattered under a heavy shoulder. 2 security guards the size of linebackers burst into the room. They saw me in my gray jumpsuit, and they saw the billionaire CEO of Fontaine Enterprises. "Get him out of here," Julian barked, "and teach him a lesson about trespassing. I don't want to see his face near this building again." The first guard grabbed my collar, his grip like iron. I was thrown against the granite wall, my head cracking against the stone. Stars exploded in my eyes and my knees buckled. "Wait," I wheezed, trying to stand as the guards hauled me up. "He is my son. His name is Julian Bradford." The guards laughed. "Sure he is, Pops. And I'm the King of Spain." The second guard punched me in the ribs. I heard a sharp crack, and a white-hot pain flared through my chest. I fell to the floor, gasping. "Goodbye, Albert," Julian said. "Do us both a favor and die quietly this time." As the guards dragged me past, I made a desperate lunge, my hand brushing the hem of his jacket. In that split second, my fingers pressed a tiny adhesive bug into the fabric. The pawn shop broker had sold me the listening device for $50. Julian didn't notice a thing. He just slapped my hand away. The guards dragged me down the service corridor, threw me into the freight elevator, and punched me in the stomach as we descended. Finally, they threw me out into the rain-soaked back alley. "Stay down, old man." One of them growled, slamming the steel door shut. I lay in the puddle, bleeding and broken, but I began to laugh. It was a wet, gurgling sound, but it was laughter. He thought he had thrown out the trash. But he was walking back into his gala wearing a wire, and I was listening. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes, damp carpet, and decades of despair. Outside the window, a cracked neon sign flashed, casting a pulsing red light across the dirty carpet. It was the only place in downtown Seattle that would take my cash without asking for a driver's license or logging my name into a computer. I sat on the edge of the saggy mattress, holding a cheap plastic bag of ice against my bruised ribs. Every breath felt like a hot needle piercing my lung. My face was swollen where the guard had slammed me against the restroom wall, and the cheap black hair dye was running down my neck in dark, greasy streaks. But the physical pain felt secondary. It was fuel. It kept my mind focused, driving out the remaining exhaustion. I pulled the cheap receiver unit from the pocket of my jumpsuit and plugged in the wire earbud. I turned the volume knob. The tiny red light on the device began to blink, picking up the signal from the transmitter I had planted on Julian's jacket hem. At first, there was only static, a low, rushing sound that made my heart sink. I adjusted the antenna, leaning closer to the window. Then the static cleared. The rustle of expensive fabric filled my ear. I heard the muffled clinking of glasses in the background, then the sound of a heavy door closing, cutting off the party noise. Julian was in his private office suite. "Mike, clean the bathroom." Julian's voice came through, crystal clear. "The lock is broken. Tell the facility manager it was a drunken guest. If anyone asks about the old man, you tell them he was a confused transient we escorted off the property. No police. I don't want to report." "Got it, Mr. Fontaine," a deep voice replied. A door opened and closed. Then, the sound of dialing. A few seconds of silence, followed by Julian's impatient sigh. "Monica," he hissed, "we have a problem. Albert is in Seattle. He was at the gala and confronted me in the restroom." "Oh my God!" Monica gasped. "How?" "I locked him in. The van is coming tomorrow." "Well, he's not in the basement," Julian snapped. "He knows about the name and the scar. If he goes to the SEC before the IPO tomorrow, Fontaine Enterprises is finished. The board will pull the offering." "What do we do?" she whimpered. "Tell Dr. Finch that Albert had a violent episode and ran. Offer him $10,000 to sign the commitment papers retroactively dated to yesterday. Once we have guardianship, my security will hunt him down. We'll put him in Sunny Meadows, and nobody will listen to him." "I'll call Finch right now," Monica whispered. "If this goes wrong, we're going to prison." "It won't go wrong if you do your job," Julian hissed. The line went dead. I sat in the dark motel room, my breathing shallow to avoid the pain in my ribs. The sheer scale of the conspiracy was laid bare. Julian and Monica had planned my erasure with the precision of a corporate merger, and now they were willing to bribe a doctor to forge legal commitment papers. But I wasn't done listening. I heard the rustle of paper, then the sound of fingers tapping on a keyboard. Julian was talking to someone else. "Bradley, is the Sentinel Trust routing verified?" Julian asked. "Yes, sir. The 200,000 is consolidated in the trust. The offshore transfer is scheduled for tomorrow morning before the ribbon cutting." "Good. We need that money out before the board takes over." "What about the trustee shell?" "Blue Horizon Holdings is still the trustee, but the registration went dormant 3 months ago. We should renew it. Do it next week." Julian dismissed. "Nobody is looking at Oregon. Focus on the transfer by 8:11 a.m. The earbud went silent as Julian walked out of his office, the faint sound of the string quartet returning before the signal faded. I took the earbud out, my hands cold. My auditor's mind, dormant for 5 years, was suddenly firing with the speed of a supercomputer. Julian had always been a quick study. He took the tax strategies I had spent a lifetime perfecting and twisted them into a shield for his stolen wealth. The Sentinel Trust was a masterpiece of corporate anonymity, registered in the Cook Islands, with Blue Horizon Holdings in Oregon acting as the trustee. It was designed to keep the money invisible to the public ledger, but they had let the registration go dormant. In the eyes of the law, a dormant shell company with no active registration was an abandoned asset. I looked at the burner phone in my hand. The battery was at 12%. I opened the web browser. my fingers flying across the keypad as I accessed the Oregon Secretary of State's business registry. I searched the name Blue Horizon Holdings. The registry loaded. Status: dormant, delinquent. I clicked the link to purchase the dormant registration. The reinstatement fee was $500. I had $400 left in cash. I was $100 short. I opened the contact list on the burner phone. There was only one number saved in the memory, a number I had memorized decades ago: Felix Henderson. He was my former colleague from the fraud unit, a retired investigator who knew the shadows of the financial system as well as I did. He was the only man in the world I could trust. I pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Who is this?" Felix grunted. "Felix, it's Albert," I whispered. A long silence stretched before Felix spoke, shocked. "Albert, you're alive? The news says you're senile and violent. It's a lie. Monica kept me locked in the basement, but I escaped. Julian is alive, Felix. He is Julian Fontaine, the billionaire CEO. He staged his death 25 years ago, and Monica collected the $2,000,000 insurance. I'm in Seattle. He's transferring $200,000 tomorrow morning, before his IPO. My God. What do you need? His trust is managed by a dormant Oregon shell, Blue Horizon Holdings. I need you to buy it back immediately. Reinstatement is $500, but my card is dead." "Opening my laptop now," Felix said. "I see it. I'm entering my card info." A tense minute passed. I stared at the peeling wallpaper of the motel room, holding my breath. "It's done," Felix said. "Reinstatement approved. We own the shell. You are officially the sole administrator of Blue Horizon Holdings." "Albert." "Thank you, Felix," I breathed, relief washing over me. "Keep your laptop open. We have a long night ahead of us." The battery icon on my burner phone flashed a warning. 10%. I needed to move fast before my only link to Felix and the outside world went dead. "Felix," I said, pressing the phone to my ear, my voice tight. "Are you logged into the Secretary of State portal?" "Yes." Felix's voice came through, accompanied by the clicking of keys. "The transaction is complete. The corporate registry shows you as the sole officer and legal representative of Blue Horizon Holdings. The corporate status is active. What's the next step?" "We need to access the Sentinel Trust," I said. "Julian set up the trust using Sentinel Trust Company in the Cook Islands. They have a portal for corporate trustees. Because Blue Horizon Holdings is the named trustee, we have the legal right to claim administrative access. Search for the Sentinel Trust login portal." "I'll." "Got it," Felix said. I'm at the login screen. It's asking for the corporate registry number and the administrator credentials. I'll enter our new active registration details. Wait, it's asking for a 2-factor authentication code. It says it was sent to the registered email address of the trustee shell. "Did you update the email during the reinstatement?" I asked, my breath catching. "Yes, I linked it to my private domain," Felix replied. "Hold on. The email just arrived. The code is 941820. I'm entering it now." A few seconds of silence passed, the tension in the room thick enough to choke on. The neon sign outside the window flashed red, 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 like a timer ticking down. "We're in," Felix breathed. "Albert, the dashboard is loading. My God, the numbers are staggering." "Read them to me," I commanded, sitting up straight, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs. "There is a single consolidated account under the trust," Felix said. "The current balance is $200,000. It's listed in liquid corporate bonds and cash reserves, and there's a pending transfer. It's scheduled to route to a private bank in Zurich, Switzerland. A numbered account with no name, designed to disappear under Swiss secrecy laws. The trigger is set for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., right when the Seattle Stock Exchange opens and the IPO ribbon-cutting ceremony begins. Julian is cleaning out the trust before the new board of directors takes control," I said. "Once the company goes public, he won't be able to move that kind of capital without board approval. He's hiding his personal war chest offshore." "We can block it," Felix suggested. "I can cancel the pending transfer right now. As the trustee, you have the authority to suspend all outward transactions." "No," I said, my auditor's brain visualizing the board. "If we block it, Julian will get a notification instantly. He'll know the trust has been compromised, and he'll use his high-priced attorneys to tie us up in court before we can do anything." "We don't block the transfer. We redirect it. Redirect it? Felix asked, his voice hesitant. Where? Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation, I said. The entire 200,000. Albert, that's a fortune, Felix gasped. Are you sure? That's your son's entire net worth. You could claim it. You could take it for yourself, for Audrey, to rebuild your life. It was never his money, I said, my voice hardening into steel. It was built on insurance fraud, the ashes of our family warehouse, and the death of my son, Philip. Philip died in that fire so Julian could collect the insurance and build his empire. I don't want a single penny of that blood money. Let it go to children who actually have a chance at a future. Route it as a donation, in memory of Philip Bradford. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Felix's heavy breathing. You're a good man, Albert, he said quietly. A much better man than your son. I'm entering the new routing details now. Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. Account number verified. What about the confirmation? I asked. Is there a dual authorization protocol? Yes, Felix said. Because the amount is over 10,000, the portal requires a digital signature from the trustee officer. That's you. I'm generating the authorization link now. I'll send it to your burner phone. You need to sign it digitally. Send it. I said, my phone buzzed. The battery bar flashed, 5%. I opened the link on the tiny screen. The page loaded slowly, the progress bar crawling. I stared at the text, authorization for outward transfer. Amount, 200,000. Recipient, Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation. My thumb hovered over the digital signature box. My hand shook, the cold glass screen, feeling like ice under my finger. I thought of Philip, the quiet boy who loved numbers, who died in the dark warehouse while Julian watched from a distance. I thought of my wife, who wept until her heart stopped, and I thought of myself, eating cold potato soup in a mildewed basement. I signed my name, Albert Bradford. I hit the submit button. The screen went black. The phone died. The battery was completely empty. I stared at the dead plastic in my hand. I had no way of knowing if the submission had gone through, no way of contacting Felix to confirm if the transfer routing was locked. I was completely cut off. I threw the dead phone onto the bed. It was a useless piece of plastic now. I had done everything within my power to set the wheels of justice in motion. The trap was set, and the bait was in place. Now I had to survive the next 8 hours until the stock exchange opened and the transfer executed. I lay back on the lumpy mattress, my fractured ribs throbbing with every breath, listening to the rain beat against the window, waiting for the dawn. The morning light that filtered through the grease-stained motel curtains was a cold, metallic gray. I woke up at 7 a.m., my muscles stiff and my fractured ribs screaming in protest as I rolled out of bed. Every movement required a conscious effort, a tight clenching of my jaw to keep from crying out. I had stopped at the pharmacy the night before to buy a roll of heavy athletic tape, and I spent 10 minutes wrapping my torso as tightly as I could, binding the broken ribs to keep them from shifting. I stood at the chipped porcelain sink and washed the dried blood from my face, checking my appearance in the mirror. The black hair dye had set, and though my face was swollen and bruised, the cheap reading glasses did their job. I looked like a weathered retiree, someone who was easily ignored. I had no way of charging my burner phone, and it remained a dead weight in my pocket. I left it on the bedside table. I had $120 left in cash. Before heading toward the financial district, I stopped at a small electronics shop down the street. The shopkeeper, a young man wearing headphones, barely looked at me as I counted out the grease-stained bills for a cheap portable radio receiver and a pair of foam headphones. Old school, he muttered, sliding the box across the counter. It was a simple analog unit, but it had a wide frequency scanner. I walked out into the damp street, unwrapped the radio, and tuned the dial to the specific shortwave frequency of the transmitter bug I had pressed into the lining of Julian's jacket. A burst of static filled the headphones, followed by the faint hum of a crowd. It worked. The transmitter's battery was designed to last 48 hours, and the signal was strong enough to carry across several city blocks. I walked toward Fontaine Tower, keeping my head down, blending into the morning rush of office workers. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp pavement, car exhaust, and roasted onions from a nearby hot dog cart. As I drew closer to the plaza, the noise of the crowd grew louder. The plaza in front of Fontaine Tower was a circus of corporate vanity. A large stage had been erected under a massive banner that read, Fontaine Enterprises. The future is now. IPO launch. Television news vans lined the curbs, their satellite dishes pointed at the gray sky like metallic flowers. A crowd of hundreds of people, investors, employees, and curious onlookers gathered around the stage. While security guards in black blazers patrolled the perimeter, I squeezed through the crowd, finding a spot near a concrete planter about 50 feet from the stage. The cold drizzle began again, slicking the granite tiles underfoot. I adjusted my headphones, keeping the wire hidden under the collar of my jacket. I scanned the stage. Julian stood near the center, surrounded by a group of men in dark suits. He was in his element, his face glowing under the stage lights as he laughed and spoke with a news anchor. He looked like the epitome of American success. Wealthy, powerful, and untouchable. He was holding a large pair of ceremonial scissors, ready for the ribbon cutting, and then I saw Monica. She stood slightly behind Julian, wearing a camel hair coat that cost more than my house. Her hands were shoved deep into her pockets, and she was shifting her weight from foot to foot, her eyes darting across the crowd. She looked pale, her mouth drawn into a tight, thin line. Every few seconds, she would pull her hand out, check her phone, and shove it back in. I adjusted the dial on my receiver, filtering out the static. Julian's voice came through, loud and clear. He was still wearing the jacket. "We have 20 minutes, Bradley." Julian's voice whispered in my ear. "Is the Swiss bank notified of the incoming wire?" "Yes, Mr. Fontaine," Bradley's voice replied from nearby. "The Swiss bank's Zurich office confirmed receipt of the pre-authorization. The moment the ribbon is cut at 8 a.m., the automatic routing trigger will execute the transfer of the 200,000. We'll have transaction verification on our monitors within 3 minutes. Good, Julian said. I watched Julian walk over to Monica. She turned to him, her posture tense. "Did you hear from the team?" she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "Calm down, Monica," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a low, warning register. "We're in public. Smile for the cameras." Monica forced a stiff, unnatural smile, waving at a photographer before leaning back toward Julian. "I can't calm down." Finch signed the commitment papers, but he was shaking. I had to pay him another $15. Susan to get him to date them to yesterday. The transport team from Sunny Meadows has 3 men waiting in an unmarked van near the depot. But we don't know where Albert is. "He's an old man with no money and no resources," Julian said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Mike's guys are checking every cheap motel in a 5-mile radius. They'll find him. Once the IPO is official and the money is secure in Zurich, we'll have him picked up and committed. By tonight, he'll be in a locked ward, drugged into compliance. This is our day, Monica. Don't ruin it. I just feel like he's watching us," she whispered, her eyes sweeping the plaza. Her gaze passed right over me. I didn't flinch. I stared back at her through the cheap plastic lenses of my glasses, a stranger in the crowd. She didn't recognize me. She looked away, her eyes continuing their frantic search. "He's probably shivering in some alley," Julian said. "He's nothing. Now stand straight. They're starting the countdown." The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, his voice booming across the plaza. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a historic day for Fontaine Enterprises. Today, we celebrate the public listing of a company built on innovation, leadership, and the extraordinary vision of our founder and CEO, Julian Fontaine." The crowd erupted in applause. Julian smiled, raising his hands to acknowledge the cheers, basking in the corporate adulation. He looked like a god on his mountaintop. I looked at the digital clock mounted on the side of the tower. 7:55 a.m. 5 minutes left, the trap was set, and Julian was standing on the platform, holding the scissors that would cut his own throat. He thought he was about to secure his empire. He had no idea that in 5 minutes, his life's work would crumble into dust, and the ghosts of his past would finally have their reckoning. The master of ceremonies raised his hands, calling for silence. The giant digital clock on the face of the obsidian tower began to blink, the numbers changing to a bright green countdown. 10, the crowd chanted in unison. their voices echoing off the glass facades of the surrounding skyscrapers. My hands clenched the fabric of my jacket pocket. My foam headphones pressed against my ears, the static hum of Julian's microphone a direct wire to his beating heart. 9, 8. I looked at Julian. He was smiling, his hands resting on the handles of the giant gold scissors. Next to him, Monica stood with her chest puffed out, her chin raised in a desperate attempt to look like she belonged on the stage. 7, 6, 5. In my headphones, I heard the click of Julian's shoes on the stage. "Get the Zurich desk on the line, Bradley," he whispered. "I want the credit confirmation the second the bell rings. 4, 3. Line is open, Mr. Fontaine," Bradley's voice muttered. "Zurich is waiting. 2, 1. Let the trading begin," the MC roared. Julian snorted the scissors closed, cutting the red velvet ribbon. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of cheers and applause. Confetti cannons exploded, sending a blizzard of silver and blue foil raining down over the plaza. On the massive LED screen above the stage, the stock ticker flashed for the first time. Font: IPO open, 24. Julian threw his head back, laughing, waving at the cameras. He shook hands with the mayor, then with the chief underwriter, his face a mask of triumph. But in my ear, the sound was very different. "Transfer executing," Bradley's voice reported, his breathing heavy. "Capital leaving the Sentinel Trust. 200,000 in transit. Routing. Cleared." I held my breath, my feet frozen on the wet granite tiles of the plaza. I stared at the stage, waiting. "Bradley?" Julian's voice came through, sharp and impatient. "Where is the Zurich confirmation? It should have hit the screen by now." A long silence followed. I could hear the frantic tapping of keys over the receiver. The string of confetti fell over my face, but I didn't brush it away. "Bradley, answer me," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What is the status?" I don't know, Mr. Fontaine." Bradley's voice was suddenly shaking, the confidence completely gone. "The transaction status shows successful. The funds have left the Sentinel Trust account. The cash reserves are 0. But the Zurich desk says they didn't receive the wire." "What do you mean they didn't receive it?" Julian snarled. "Where did the money go? Did the routing number fail?" "No, sir," Bradley stammered, his typing growing faster, louder. "The routing number cleared. The transaction was processed through the Federal Reserve wire network. But the beneficiary details, they're wrong. The recipient isn't the Zurich account." "Who is the recipient?" Julian demanded, his voice rising in panic. I could see him on the stage, his smile turning stiff as he turned his back to the crowd, walking toward the rear of the platform. Monica noticed his movement, her face contorting with concern as she followed him. It's Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation," Bradley whispered. "The entire 200,000 has been credited to their donation account." "What?" Julian roared, forgetting they were in public. Several executives on the stage turned to look at him. "That's impossible. Cancel it. Pull the transfer back." "I can't, Mr. Fontaine," Bradley cried. "It's a Fedwire transfer. It's instantaneous and irreversible. Under the Federal Reserve rules, once a wire transfer is processed and settled, the transaction is final. The sending bank cannot recall the funds without the explicit consent of the beneficiary. The hospital's bank has already confirmed receipt. The credit notification is final. It's gone." "Who authorized this?" Julian hissed, his chest heaving under his bespoke suit. "I am the only administrator of the Sentinel Trust. Blue Horizon Holdings is the trustee, and I own Blue Horizon." "No, sir," Bradley said, his voice cracking. "I'm looking at the Oregon Secretary of State database right now. Reinstatement papers were filed last night at 11:45 p.m. The corporate registry was updated. You're not the administrator of Blue Horizon Holdings anymore." "Then who is?" Julian screamed. The registered officer is listed as Albert Bradford," Bradley said, his voice barely a whisper. "He reinstated the company using his name. He signed the digital authorization link at 11:58 p.m. He authorized the donation." I watched Julian on the stage. He froze, his body turning rigid as if he had been struck by lightning. The giant gold scissors slipped from his hand, clattering against the wooden stage floor. The journalists in the front row noticed the CEO's sudden distress. Microphones were thrust forward, and cameras zoomed in on Julian's pale, sweat-slicked face. "Mr. Fontaine, is there a problem with the opening share price?" "Mr. Fontaine, look over here." "Albert," Julian whispered, his voice cracking, the arrogant veneer completely shattered. Monica grabbed his arm, her face white. "Julian, what's wrong? What happened?" "The money," Julian gasped, his eyes wide and vacant as he stared at the crowd. "It's gone. He took it. He gave it away." "Who?" she screamed, shaking him. "Who took it? My father," Julian whispered. I stood by the concrete planter, the rain dripping from the brim of my cap, the foam headphones still pressed to my ears. I watched my son crumble, his empire hollowed out in a single second. The 200,000 he had traded his soul for, the money he had let his brother die for, was gone. It belonged to the children now. Julian looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd in a desperate, wild panic. He was looking for me. He saw me. Our eyes locked across the 50 feet of plaza, through the falling confetti and the cheering crowd. He recognized me. The color drained from his face, and his mouth fell open in a silent scream of rage. I raised my hand, giving him a slow, mocking wave. Then, I turned and walked away into the city. The rain felt clean on my skin. For 25 years, I had carried the burden of Julian's ghost, a weight that had bent my spine and broken my spirit. But as I merged into the crowd of Seattle commuters, my chest felt light despite the broken ribs. I had no money, no home, and the police were searching for me. But I was free. The audit was complete. I boarded the transit bus heading south. I sat looking out at the rain-lashed streets of Seattle, the neon signs of coffee shops blurring into a smear of red and white. My hands were freezing, and my broken ribs throbbed constantly. But I kept the radio receiver clutched to my chest, my thumb adjusting the frequency to keep the signal locked. I took a seat in the middle row, pulling my wet collar tight and pressing the headphones to my ears. The transmitter signal was still holding, though it crackled with static as the bus moved further from the tower. I could hear Julian's breathing, shallow, jagged gasps of a man whose world had just collapsed. Then came the crashing sound of glass breaking, followed by a heavy thud. He was destroying his office. "Julian, stop it!" Monica's voice shrieked, though it was muffled over the microphone. "The board members are right outside the door. You can't let them see you like this." "My money is gone, Monica!" Julian screamed, his voice raw and cracking with fury. $200 million. It's in the hospital's account. They've already issued a public press release thanking Fontaine Enterprises for our extraordinary generosity. The underwriters are congratulating me on the stage, and I am ruined. "We have to call the bank," she pleaded. "There has to be a mistake. A system error." "There is no mistake," Julian roared. "Albert did this. He used the dormant shell. He reinstated Blue Horizon Holdings under his own name, and he signed the transfer. Bradley checked the registry. It's legal. He is the sole officer of the trustee." "How did he know?" Monica whimpered. "How did he find out about the trust?" "He was locked in the basement." "It doesn't matter how he knew," Julian hissed, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper that made my blood run cold. "What matters is what happens next. The underwriters are going to audit the Sentinel Trust's history, so they're going to trace the seed money. If they look closely at Blue Horizon Holdings, they'll see the name Albert Bradford. The Sentinel Trust was funded by the $2,000 Ziuzine insurance payout from the warehouse fire. That fire was ruled an accident, but it was arson, and I said it. If the SEC starts an investigation, they'll pull the old police files, they'll compare the signatures, and they'll realize that the policy was issued to Julian Bradford. They'll know I staged my death. We'll be facing mail fraud, wire fraud, arson, and conspiracy charges before the end of the week." "We have to leave," Monica urged. "We have the private jet at Boeing Field. We can fly to Panama tonight. We still have the offshore assets in the Cayman accounts." "We can't fly," Monica, Julian spat. "The moment we board that plane, the SEC will flag it as a flight risk. The IPO shares will collapse, and the federal prosecutors will issue a warrant before we clear U.S. airspace. We have to stay and fight. We have to find Albert and force him to sign the shell company back to us. Or we make sure he never speaks again." I heard the heavy steps of Mike, the head of security, entering the office. "Mr. Fontaine." We checked the security logs from the loading dock. A man in a facility maintenance uniform stole a cart and took the freight elevator to the 50th floor yesterday. I know he was here, Mike, Julian yelled. He was in the restroom. I want him found. Search every transit station, every bus depot, every cheap hotel. He has no money, no phone, no car. He can't have gone far. Actually, sir, Mike said, his voice flat, we checked the credit card alerts. Your wife's secondary account. The one assigned to your daughter, Audrey, registered a charge at a transit kiosk in Portland last night. A heavy silence fell over the receiver. I could hear the hum of the office ventilation system. Audrey, Monica whispered. She helped him. She was at the house when he escaped. That little bitch, Julian hissed, his voice trembling with a new dark rage. She betrayed her own family. She gave him the card. Julian, she's your daughter, Monica cried. She is a liability, Julian corrected, his voice flat and devoid of any human emotion. And right now, she is our only leverage. Mike, where is she? She's at her apartment near the university campus in Eugene, Mike replied. Go get her, Julian commanded. Bring her to the old family warehouse in Oregon, the abandoned one near the river gorge, the one we burned 25 years ago. Julian, no, Monica screamed. You can't bring her there. That place is where this story began, Monica, and it's where it's going to end. Julian interrupted, his voice cold as ice. We'll wait for Albert there. He'll find out we have her. He's an auditor, a man of rules and guilt. He won't let his precious granddaughter pay for his sins. He'll come to us. And when he does, Monica asked, her voice trembling. When he does, we'll get the signature back, Julian said. And then we'll clean up this family once and for all. The signal began to fade, the static rising to a loud, roaring wave as the bus turned a corner, heading deeper into the concrete maze of the industrial district. The foam headphones went silent, leaving only the dull hum of the bus engine. My heart felt like it had stopped. My chest was so tight I could barely draw breath, the athletic tape around my ribs constricting my lungs. They were going after Audrey, my brave, kind granddaughter, who had looked at me with warmth when everyone else saw a ghost, was now in the crosshairs of a predator, and it was my fault. I had used her card. I had left the trail that led straight to her. I stood up, stumbling down the aisle of the bus. Stop the bus, I called out to the driver. I need to get off. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, frowning, but pulled the coach over to the curb. I scrambled down the steps and onto the wet sidewalk. I hit the wet pavement running, my boots splashing through puddles of muddy water. I needed a phone, but mine was dead. I needed a car, but I had no keys. I stood on the corner of 4th Avenue, the rain pouring down my neck, looking at the traffic rushing past. I was a fugitive in Seattle, with a silver alert on my head, and my granddaughter's life was at stake. I had to get back to Oregon. I had to get to Audrey before they did. The rain poured down in a heavy gray sheet, washing the soot of the industrial district into the storm drains. I stood on the corner of 4th Avenue, my breath coming in short, painful gasps as my broken ribs throbbed. I was stranded. I had no car, a working phone, and a silver alert on my head. If I walked into a transit station or tried to buy a train ticket, the police would arrest me before I could even reach the platform. I had to think. I was a forensic auditor. I specialized in finding routes through blocked pathways. Across the street, the neon sign of a Greasy Spoon diner flickered through the rain, the Anchor Cafe. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of fried bacon and stale coffee. An old trucker sat in a corner booth, loudly complaining to the cook about the snow on the mountain passes. I walked straight to the counter, where a tired-looking waitress with a name tag that read Donna was wiping down the laminate surface. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "My car broke down a few blocks away, and my phone battery is dead. I need to make an emergency call. Can I use your landline?" She looked at my bruised face, my swollen cheek, and my wet maintenance jumpsuit. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Phone is for staff only, honey. There's a payphone at the gas station down the block." I reached into my pocket, pulled out one of my remaining $20 bills, and slid it across the damp counter, covering it with my hand. "It's for my granddaughter. She's in trouble." Donna looked at the bill, then at the desperate look in my eyes. She sighed, reached under the counter, and pulled up a black plastic cordless phone. Placing it on the counter, Make it quick, she said, pocketing the cash and walking toward the kitchen. I dialed Felix's number from memory. He answered on the second ring. Felix, I whispered. It's Albert! Albert! Thank God! Felix said, his voice tense. The transaction went through. Hospital's donation account received the wire at exactly 8:01 a.m. The local news is already calling it the largest single private donation in Washington history. Julian is on television right now, trying to smile, but he looks like a walking corpse. I've been trying to call your burner phone. It's dead. The battery ran out, I said. Listen to me, Felix. I heard Julian on the wire. They figured out Audrey helped me escape. Julian ordered his security chief, Mike, to kidnap her from Eugene. They are taking her to the old family warehouse in Oregon, the one near the river gorge. What? Felix gasped. Eugene? That's only an hour south of Portland. I can drive down there right now. No, Felix, don't, I urged, my voice tight. Mike and his men are professional security. They're armed and they're desperate. If you try to intervene, they'll kill you and they'll still take Audrey. We can't fight them on their terms. We have to beat them to the warehouse or we have to set a trap. But I'm stuck in Seattle. I have no transportation. I can't get up to Seattle and back down in time, Felix said, frustration clear in his voice. It's a 3-hour drive just to reach you. But wait, I have a friend in Seattle, Silas Vance. He's a retired detective from the county sheriff's department. He owes me his life from an old fraud investigation. We worked together. He's got a fast car and he knows how to handle a weapon. I'll call him. He'll pick you up. Where should I wait? I asked. The Anchor Cafe, I replied, reading the menu on the counter. I'm on 4th Avenue. Stay inside, out of sight, Felix said. Silas will be there in 15 minutes. He drives a black Dodge Charger. I'll send him your description. Thank you, Felix, I said. I handed the cordless phone back to Donna, who had returned with a fresh pot of coffee. She poured me a cup without asking. You look like you need it, she said. I sat in the corner booth, sipping the hot, bitter coffee, my eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. The minutes crawled. Every time the diner door opened, my heart hammered against my taped ribs. I half expected Mike's men, or the state troopers, to burst through the door. At exactly 15 minutes, a low, powerful rumble vibrated through the diner's glass windows. A sleek black Dodge Charger pulled up to the curb, its windshield wipers slapping away the heavy rain. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing a tall man in a leather jacket, a prominent scar running down his left cheek. He gave me a sharp, brief nod. I dropped the coffee cup, slid out of the booth, and walked out into the rain. I opened the passenger door and climbed into the warm cabin of the Charger. The interior smelled of leather, old coffee, and gun oil. A police scanner buzzed softly on the dashboard, crackling with static. Silas Vance didn't offer a handshake. He just shifted the car into drive, the tires spinning on the wet asphalt as we launched forward. Felix filled me in, Silas said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He says you're a good man who got screwed by his own blood. Something like that, I said, leaning back into the seat, a wince escaping my lips as my ribs compressed. Felix told me about the warehouse fire in '01, Silas said, his eyes fixed on the highway. The arson investigation was swept under the rug back then. I remember the case files. It was a messy job, but the local sheriff was paid off. The name Julian Bradford was on the death certificate. Now you're telling me he's the billionaire on the news. He staged it, I replied, my voice cold. Staged the whole thing. Philip died in that fire because Julian locked the emergency doors from the outside. He wanted the insurance money to start his new life. Then this isn't just about money, Albert, Silas said, his jaw tightening. This is a murder case. It always was, I whispered. We have a long drive ahead of us, Silas said, hitting the blinker as we merged onto the highway heading south. Eugene is 300 miles. We'll be there in 3 hours if I push the speed limit. Just hold on. I closed my eyes as the Charger roared down Interstate 5, the gray rain-blurred landscape of Washington State flying past. The stage was set. The final confrontation was coming, and I was heading straight back into the fire. The Dodge Charger flew down the highway, the tires cutting through the standing water with a loud rhythmic hiss. The storm had followed us south, turning the day into a dark, watery twilight. The trees of the Pacific Northwest rushed past. a wall of deep green blurred by the speed and the rain. I held Silas's cell phone to my ear, listening to the dialing tone. Felix answered immediately. "Felix," I said, "where are we?" "I've got the Portland Police Department scanner on," Felix said, his voice grim. "The Eugene police just responded to a call at Audrey's apartment complex. A neighbor reported seeing 3 men in dark suits force their way into her unit. They dragged her out, forcing her into a black Chevrolet Suburban. The plates were registered to a shell company owned by Fontaine Enterprises." My chest tightened, a cold panic seizing my throat. "Which direction are they heading?" "They hit I-5 heading north," Felix said. "They're coming toward Portland. The traffic is heavy, but Silas says they'll make the warehouse in about an hour and a half. If they left Eugene 20 minutes ago, they'll arrive at the Old River warehouse by 10:45 a.m. Felix also said the gorge is under a flash flood warning. The river is rising fast and the wind is hitting 40 miles an hour. If you take that logging road, watch out for mudslides." I looked at the digital clock on the Charger's dashboard. 9:15 a.m. "How far are we, Silas?" I asked, looking at the driver. Silas glanced at the dashboard navigator, his fingers tapping the leather-wrapped steering wheel. "We just crossed the Columbia River back into Oregon. In this weather, we're at least 2 hours from the gorge. That puts us arriving at 11:15 a.m. We're going to be 30 minutes late." "We can't be late," I told Felix. "If they get her inside that warehouse, if Julian arrives before we do, they'll force her to write a confession, or they'll use her to get to me. We have to close the gap." "There's a logging bypass," Silas said, his eyes narrowing as he watched the road. "It runs along the backside of the mountain, cutting through the old timberlands. It's unpaved, mud-slicked, and dangerous in this rain, but it connects directly to the river road near the gorge. If I push the Charger, it'll shave 25 minutes off our time. But if we spin out, we're dead. Take it," I said without hesitation. "Every second we lose is a second Audrey is in danger." Silas didn't argue. He hit the brakes, the Charger sliding slightly on the wet asphalt as he turned onto a narrow gravel road that wound upward into the dark pine forest. The smooth highway was replaced by a bumpy, violently shaking ride, the headlights cutting through the thick mountain mist. The trees closed in around us, their branches scraping the sides of the car. "I know that warehouse, Albert," Silas said, his eyes fixed on the muddy track ahead. "It's a 2-story timber and corrugated steel structure built right over the river dock. Half the floorboards are rotted out, and it's surrounded by high chain-link fencing. If Mike's team gets inside, they'll have the high ground. It's a death trap." "I know the layout by heart, Silas," I replied, my voice steady. "I bought that building in '89. There's an old service tunnel that runs from the riverbank directly under the loading dock. It was used to route water pipes. If the doors are locked, we can get in through the cellar floorboards." "Felix," I said back into the phone, "keep monitoring the scanner. If Julian's jet lands at Portland International, or if there's any movement near the warehouse, let us know." "I'm on it, Albert," Felix said. "I've also contacted a contact in the state police. But I had to be careful. Julian still has the silver alert active on you. If I give them the warehouse location, they might show up and arrest you before we can secure Audrey. They think you're a violent lunatic." "We handle it ourselves first," I said. "Once Audrey is safe, we let the world know the truth. Not before." I hung up, placing the phone in the cup holder. I looked out the window, watching the dark trees fly past. The shaking of the car sent jolt after jolt of pain through my bound ribs, but I welcomed it. The physical pain kept me from drowning in the sheer suffocating guilt that threatened to crush my mind. It was all repeating. 25 years ago, I was working late at the audit firm when the phone rang. It was the police, telling me our family warehouse was on fire. By the time I arrived, the building was a furnace, the red flames lighting up the night sky. Philip was inside. The investigators told me it was a faulty electrical panel, a tragic accident, and I believed them. I blamed myself for not checking the wiring, for letting my son work late in that old building. My wife blamed me too, her eyes cold until the day she died. I remember the smell of the wet ashes the next morning. I stood in the ruins, holding a blackened metal toy plane Philip had built. Julian stood next to me, pretending to cry, his arm around my shoulder. I comforted him. I told him we would get through this. All the while, he had the keys to the emergency exit in his pocket. Now, I knew. The fire wasn't an accident. Julian had locked his own brother in that building. He had listened to Philip's screams, watched the smoke rise, and walked away with a smile, knowing the $2 million insurance payout would fund his new identity in Seattle. He had sacrificed his brother for a billionaire's life. And now, he was going to do the same to Audrey. The rage that rose inside me was hot and clean, burning away the lingering fear, the exhaustion, and the pain. I was an auditor. I spent my life finding the errors, the hidden debts, the double entries. Julian was the final error in my books, and I was going to correct it. "Hold on," Silas warned, his hands turning the wheel sharply. The Charger hit a deep patch of mud, the back end fishtailing violently toward the steep mountain cliff. The tires spun, throwing up a shower of gravel and dirt. For a second, we were sliding sideways, the headlights illuminating the empty air of the drop-off. Silas roared the engine, his foot pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The tires caught the gravel, pulling us back onto the road. The car launched forward, diving deeper into the dark, rainy forest. The black Dodge Charger emerged from the tree line, the mud-splattered chassis slamming hard as the tires hit the cracked asphalt of the river road. It was 10:35 a.m. The logging shortcut had worked, shaving 25 minutes off the drive. Through the sheets of gray, wind-driven rain, I saw the silhouette of the old warehouse rising from the riverbank like a rotting skeleton. I looked at the decaying sign hanging from the facade, Bradford and Sons Logistics. The letters were faded, peeling, and scorched by the old fire. It was a monument to the family I had lost, and the business Julian had cremated to fund his rise. The corrugated steel sheets on the roof rattled violently in the gale, and the wooden support piers beneath the building groaned as the brown, swollen waters of the Columbia River surged around them. The river was high, the flash flood warning turning the gorge into a dangerous vortex. And there, parked right outside the rusted chain-link gate, was the black Chevrolet Suburban. Its headlights were still warm, the engine ticking as it cooled in the rain. I saw them. 3 men in dark, rain-slicked jackets were dragging Audrey toward the side entrance. Her hands were bound behind her back with yellow zip ties, and she was struggling, her feet sliding on the mud. She threw her head back, screaming into the wind, but the roar of the river swallowed the sound. One of the men, a thick-necked guard I recognized from the gala security, grabbed her hair, forcing her through the heavy wooden door. "Audrey!" I cried, my hand reaching for the door handle. Silas grabbed my arm, his grip like a steel clamp. "No! Look at them, Albert. They're carrying. If you walk up to that door, they'll put a bullet in you before you can say a word. We use the tunnel." I forced myself to breathe, the athletic tape around my ribs constricting my chest. He was right. I was a 73-year-old man with broken ribs. I couldn't fight them in a sprint. I had to use the auditor's route, the hidden entrance. Silas steered the Charger behind a mound of rusting machinery and overgrown blackberry brambles, hiding the car from the road. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence inside the cabin deafening. He reached into his glove compartment, pulled out a black Glock 19 pistol, and checked the chamber with a metallic click. He shoved it into his waistband, then reached behind the seat and handed me a heavy, solid steel Maglite flashlight. "Use it as a club if you have to," he said, his scarred cheek tightening as he looked at me. "Ready? Ready," I said. We opened the doors and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit us like a physical wall, the rain stinging my face. We crouched low, running along the perimeter of the chain-link fence, keeping behind the decaying industrial equipment that littered the yard. We reached the riverbank. The water was brown and churning, carrying large logs and debris downriver. The entrance to the old service tunnel was right where I remembered it, hidden beneath a concrete ledge on the riverbank. It was a rusted, corrugated steel pipe, about 4 feet in diameter, used decades ago to route water lines to the boilers. The river was so high that the bottom half of the pipe was submerged in muddy, freezing water. "It's flooded," Silas muttered, looking at the dark, rushing water inside the pipe. "It's the only way," I said. I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled into the pipe. The water was ice cold, instantly soaking through my jumpsuit and my clothes, turning my legs numb. The mud at the bottom of the pipe was thick and slimy, dragging at my hands. Every crawl forward sent a jolt of white-hot agony through my chest as my broken ribs compressed against my thighs. In the absolute dark of the pipe, my mind played tricks on me. I thought I saw a younger Philip crawling ahead of me, his hand reaching back to guide me. "Just a little further, Dad." His ghost seemed to whisper in the rushing water. I followed the memory, ignoring the agony in my chest, my breath coming in ragged animal gasps. Behind me, I could hear Silas swearing softly as he dragged himself through the freezing muck. The tunnel was pitch black, smelling of rust, stagnant water, and rotting timber. We crawled for 50 feet, the pipe sloping upward slightly until we were out of the water. Above us, the sound of the storm faded, replaced by a low, hollow echo. We were directly beneath the warehouse. I could hear the creak of the floorboards, and then the muffled sound of footsteps. I stopped, holding my breath. Silas crawled up beside me, the steel barrel of his Glock glinting in the dim light. Directly above our heads was the old iron hatch. It was a rectangular utility access panel, rusted shut by 25 years of damp river air. I reached up, my fingers finding the latch. I pressed my shoulder against the iron plate and pushed. The rust held. I pushed harder, my ribs screaming in protest, a wince escaping my lips. "Let me," Silas whispered. He squeezed past me in the narrow space, his broad shoulders wedging against the concrete pipe wall. He placed his palms flat against the iron hatch and gave a sudden, explosive heave. With a loud, metallic crack that sounded like a gunshot, the rust broke. The hatch swung upward, revealing the dark crawl space under the main floorboards. Silas climbed through first, his gun raised, clearing the area. He reached down and hauled me up. We stood in the dark, dusty space beneath the warehouse's loading dock. The floorboards above us were spaced an inch apart, letting thin slivers of light cut through the gloom. I pressed my eye to a gap in the wood. Audrey was sitting on a wooden crate in the center of the dusty floor, her face bruised, her hair wet and tangled. The thick-necked guard, Mike, stood over her, holding a satellite phone. The second guard, a thin man with a nervous tic, looked out the window at the storm. "The river is rising fast," the thin guard muttered. "The water is already hitting the lower docks. We should get this over with." Mike laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "The river can take the whole building for all I care. Once the boss gets the signature, we're burning it anyway. The insurance is already filed in Seattle under the new corporate policy. It's a double payout." I closed my eyes, my hand gripping the cold steel of the flashlight. The audit was entering its final phase. I had to make sure the final entry was written in blood. The heavy wooden double doors at the front of the warehouse groaned and creaked, then burst open with a loud slam. The wind howled through the open double doors, carrying a spray of rain that smelled of mud and ozone. Outside, a flash of lightning illuminated the river gorge, throwing long, jagged shadows across the warehouse walls. The thunder followed a second later, a deep rumble that vibrated through the floorboards under my feet. Two figures stepped inside, their silhouettes dark against the gray storm outside. Julian and Monica. Julian had stripped off his wet navy jacket, wearing only his silk shirt, which was now damp and clinging to his frame. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Monica followed closely behind, her expensive camel hair coat ruined, mud splattering the hem. She was shivering violently, her hands clasped to her chest, her eyes darting around the decaying building. "Where is she?" Julian barked, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. Mike pointed to the wooden crate in the center of the dusty floor. "Right there, Mr. Fontaine. She hasn't said a word." Julian strode across the floor, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the wood. He stopped in front of Audrey, looking down at her with a face twisted in rage. Without warning, he backhanded her across the face. Audrey's head snapped to the side, a sharp cry escaping her lips as she nearly fell off the crate. A trickle of dark blood began to run from the corner of her mouth, staining her light blue scrubs. "Julian, no!" Monica shrieked, running forward and grabbing his arm. "You can't do this. She's our daughter. We're already in enough trouble." "She's a traitor!" Julian screamed, shaking her off with a violent shove. He bent down, grabbing Audrey by the hair and pulling her head back so she was forced to look at him. "Where is he? Where is your grandfather? Where is Albert? He is a ghost, Audrey. He's been living in the past for 25 years. He thinks he's some kind of hero, but he's just a clerk who couldn't protect his own family. He let Philip die in this very room. No, Julian, Audrey whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. You killed Philip. Grandpa knows the truth. He knows you locked the emergency doors from the outside. Julian laughed, a cold, empty sound. Philip was a weakling. He was going to spend his life counting pennies with Dad. I did him a favor. I turned his useless life into something valuable. I built this empire on that insurance money. You're a monster, Audrey spat. I'm a survivor, Julian hissed. And right now, you're going to write a statement. You're going to write a confession, explaining how you and that crazy old man hacked into my trust, how you stole the $200,000, and how you forced my financial director to route the transfer under duress. If you sign it, the board can claim the transfer was fraudulent and the Swiss bank can freeze the funds. I'll never sign anything, Audrey said, her voice steady. Then I'll throw you into the river, Julian threatened, his voice dropping to a deadly flat whisper. He pointed toward the open loading dock at the back of the building, where the brown, swollen waters of the Columbia River were rushing past, only inches below the wooden deck. The current is running at 10 knots. In this storm, if you go over the edge with those zip ties on your wrists, you'll be 3 miles downriver before anyone realizes you're gone. They'll find your body in a week and call it a tragic accident. Do you think I'm joking? Julian, please, Monica sobbed, falling to her knees on the dusty floorboards. We can just run. We can go to Panama. We don't need the money. Shut up, Monica, Julian roared, kicking a piece of rotting timber across the floor. We are facing prison. The SEC is already auditing the IPO. If we run, we're fugitives for the rest of our lives. If we clear my name with her confession, we keep the company, we keep the money, and we keep our lives. I am not going to lose everything because of a senile old man who should have died 25 years ago. Beneath the floorboards, my heart hammered against my taped ribs. I looked at Silas. He was crouched beside me, his Glock held in a two-handed grip, his eyes locked on the guards. He looked at me, giving me a slow, silent nod. The time for auditing was over. The books had to be closed. I reached up, grabbed the edges of the wooden opening, and hauled myself up. I ignored the white-hot flash of pain in my chest, the cold water dripping from my hair. I stepped out of the crawl space, my boots thudding softly against the dusty floorboards. I stood in the dim light of the warehouse, holding the heavy steel flashlight in my hand. You don't need to search for me, Julian, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the empty structure. I'm right here. Everyone froze. Julian turned slowly, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he saw me standing there. The dyed black hair was messy and wet, my face was bruised, and my gray maintenance jumpsuit was covered in mud from the tunnel, but the eyes behind the cheap reading glasses were unmistakable. Dad? He whispered, his voice cracking, the monstrous CEO suddenly sounding like a terrified child. Monica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. Albert! Mike and the other two guards immediately reached for their waistbands, their hands moving toward their holstered weapons. But before they could draw, Silas Vance climbed out of the hatch, his Glock pointed directly at Mike's chest. Freeze! Silas roared, his voice booming like thunder. Sheriff's Department, drop the weapons! Drop them now! The guards hesitated, their eyes darting from Silas to Julian, calculating the odds. The tension in the room was a loaded spring, ready to snap at the first movement. The standoff lasted only a heartbeat, but in that second, the silence inside the warehouse was total, saved for the drumming of the rain on the steel roof. Shoot him! Julian screamed, his voice rising to a high, hysterical shriek. Shoot them both! If they leave this building, we are going to prison! Mike, kill them! Mike drew. But Silas Vance was faster. The deafening roar of his Glock exploded through the warehouse. The muzzle flash lighting up the dim corners. The bullet hit Mike's shoulder, the force spinning him around. His gun clattered onto the floorboards, and he fell to his knees, his hand clutching his bleeding shoulder as he groaned in agony. The other two guards didn't hesitate. They pulled their pistols and opened fire. The gunfight was brief but terrifying. The bullets tore through the dry cedar walls, sending clouds of red dust and splinters raining down over us. The smell of burnt gunpowder mixed with the scent of wet rot and river mud. Silas moved like a professional, using the timber pillars for cover, firing controlled pairs that kept the guards pinned down, their bullets splintering the wooden support beams and tearing through the dry timber walls. "Get down," Silas yelled, diving behind a thick wooden pillar, firing back. I didn't think about my broken ribs. I didn't think about the pain. I ran forward, throwing myself over Audrey as a bullet shattered the top of the wooden crate she was sitting on. Splinters of wood stung my face. I reached into the pocket of my jumpsuit, pulling out the cheap disposable razor I had bought at the pharmacy. I had broken the plastic guard off the blade in the motel room, turning it into a makeshift utility knife. With a swift, desperate motion, I sliced through the yellow zip ties on her wrists. "Audrey, go!" I gasped, my chest burning, my lungs screaming for air. "Run out the back door of the dock. Go down the service stairs to the riverbank." "Grandpa, no!" she cried, her eyes wide with terror, her face covered in dust. "I'm not leaving you." "Go!" I roared, pushing her toward the rear exit. "Silas is covering you. Run!" Another round of gunshots shattered the air. One of the guards fell, clutching his thigh, while Silas moved to a new position, his gun smoking. Monica lay on the floor near the entrance, her head covered by her hands, screaming in a high, continuous pitch of absolute terror. Julian stood in the center of the floor, his silk shirt stained with mud and sweat. He saw Audrey running, and he saw Silas advancing on the remaining guard. He realized his escape route was closed. He looked at me, his eyes wild, the last remnants of his sanity burning away in a fire of murderous rage. He grabbed a heavy steel crowbar that lay near an old tool chest. "You ruined my life!" Julian screamed, his face contorted into the mask of a monster. "You took my money, you ruined my company, I built it all, and you tore it down! You senile old bastard!" He lunged at me, swinging the crowbar with all his strength. I tried to duck, but my stiff knees and my taped ribs betrayed me. The steel bar swung downward, grazing my left shoulder. The force of the blow was staggering, sending a shockwave of pain through my body that turned my vision white. I hit the floorboards hard, my breath escaping in a wet wheeze. The crowbar had cracked my collarbone. I lay on my back, gasping, unable to move. Julian stood over me, his chest heaving, his silk shirt torn. He raised the steel crowbar high above his head, his knuckles white, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute, remorseless intent. "I watched the flames from the hill, Dad," Julian hissed, his teeth bared in a feral grin. "I watched the warehouse burn, I watched the smoke rise, and I felt nothing but relief. I was free of your small, pathetic life, and now, you come here in a janitor's suit to take my money? You think you're my father? My father died in that small house. I should have locked you in the room with Philip. I should have finished this 25 years ago. Say goodbye." He swung the bar down for the killing blow, but before the steel could hit my skull, a weight slammed to his back. Audrey had returned. She had run back from the exit, throwing her entire weight against Julian's shoulders, shoving him forward. Julian stumbled. The crowbar flew from his hands, clattering across the floor. He tried to catch his balance, his leather shoes sliding on the wet, rotted floorboards at the very edge of the open loading dock. The wood groaned. Under his weight, the decaying timber of the outer deck cracked and shattered. Julian's feet slid through the opening, his body dropping. "Julian!" Monica shrieked, looking up. He fell, but at the last second, his fingers caught the rusted iron support pipe that ran along the edge of the dock. He hung there, his arms stretched to their limits, his body dangling over the roaring, brown waters of the Columbia River. The metal pipe creaked under his weight, the rusted brackets groaning. The river was a brown beast below him, the swollen current rushing at 10 knots, carrying thick logs and debris. The freezing spray splashed his legs, his fingers bleeding as they scraped against the rough metal. If he fell, the undertow would drag him beneath the docks and he would drown in seconds. "Help me!" Julian screamed, his fingers slipping on the wet, rusted metal. He looked up at Audrey, then at me, his face pale with a raw, primal terror. "Dad, help me, please!" I dragged myself up, my left arm hanging uselessly at my side, my chest screaming in agony. I walked slowly to the edge of the broken dock, looking down at my son, Monica ran forward, but Silas grabbed her arm, keeping her back. "The floor is collapsed," Silas warned. "If you step out there, you'll go over too." I stood at the edge, looking down into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the boy who had locked his brother in a burning furnace. The loop was closing. The wind roared through the collapsed opening of the dock, bringing with it a freezing mist that coated my face. Below, the brown, swollen waters of the Columbia River churned and boiled, a chaotic torrent carrying massive logs and industrial debris from upriver. The Columbia River was a swollen, brown monster. Upriver, the dams had opened their spillways, and the current carried massive pine logs, floating docks, and sheets of corrugated metal that smashed against the wooden piers of the warehouse with deafening thuds, shaking the entire building. "Dad, please!" Julian screamed, his fingers slipping another fraction of an inch down the slick, wet metal of the pipe. His arms were trembling violently, his face white, his knuckles a bloodless white. His fingers, slick with mud and blood from the rough metal, were losing their purchase. I saw his index finger slip, then the middle. He was screaming, his eyes wide with a raw, primal terror. I'm sorry about Philip. I was young and stupid, Dad. I didn't want him to die. I just wanted the money. I didn't think the warehouse would burn that fast. I'm sorry about the house, the basement, everything. Just pull me up. Don't let me drown." I stood at the very edge of the rotted timbers, looking down at my son. Every breath was an agony of fire in my chest, my cracked collarbone throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. "You aren't sorry, Julian," I said, my voice flat, carrying over the roar of the water. "You're just caught. An auditor doesn't accept excuses, Julian. He only accepts balances, and your account is severely delinquent." "Albert, save him!" Monica shrieked from the background, struggling against Silas's grip. "He's your son. You can't just watch him die." "He died 25 years ago, Monica," I said, not turning around. "We buried him in an empty box." "Dad, I'll give it all back," Julian cried, his voice breaking into a sob as his left hand slipped completely off the pipe. He swung wildly, his entire weight now suspended by only his right hand. The rusted metal pipe creaked and bent downward, the brackets holding it to the wet timber frame groaning under the strain. "I'll sign the shell back to you. I'll sign the confession. I'll tell the police everything. Just grab my hand." I looked at his outstretched hand, the hand that had turned the key on the emergency doors of this very warehouse, locking his brother in a burning furnace. The hand that had signed the life insurance claim, and the checks that had paid for my basement cell. I reached out my hand. Julian's eyes flared with a desperate hope, his fingers reaching upward toward mine. But I didn't grab his hand. I reached down, my fingers wrapping around the hem of his silk shirt, and I ripped the tiny adhesive bug, the transmitter, from his chest. I held it up, letting him see it in the dim, gray light. "The audit is complete, Julian," I whispered. "I've recorded the entire entry." At that exact second, the rusted iron brackets holding the support pipe to the dock gave way. With a loud, splintering crack, the wood sheared. The pipe snapped. Julian fell. He didn't scream. He just stared up at me, his eyes wide with an absolute, empty shock as he dropped into the brown, churning torrent below. The impact was a dull, heavy splash, swallowed instantly by the roar of the river. The swift, violent current dragged his body under the rotted timber pilings of the dock in less than a second. He rose once, 100 feet downriver, a dark shape in the white foam, and then he was gone, swallowed by the dark, churning vortex of the gorge. Monica collapsed onto the floorboards, a guttural animal wail escaping her throat as she wept hysterically, her hands clawing at the dusty wood. The gunfight had stopped. Silas Vance stood near the side entrance, his Glock lowered, the remaining guards lying disarmed and bleeding on the floor. Silas walked slowly to the edge of the broken dock, looking down at the empty, rushing water. "He's gone," Silas said, his voice flat. "Nobody survives that current. The undertow at the gorge is a graveyard." I stood there, the rain washing the mud from my face, the heavy steel flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering onto the wood. The weight that had bent my spine for a quarter of a century was gone, but it left a hollow, echoing void in my chest. I had my revenge, I had corrected the books. But Philip was still dead, and my wife was still in her grave. Audrey ran forward, throwing her arms around my neck. "Grandpa!" she sobbed, her face pressed against my shoulder. "You're safe. We're safe." I held her with my one good arm, my body shaking with a sudden, uncontrollable sob. "I've got you, Audrey," I whispered. "I've got you." The wail of sirens cut through the roar of the storm, growing louder, closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the cracked windows of the warehouse, reflecting off the corrugated steel walls. The state police were arriving, their tires crunching on the gravel driveway outside. "They're here," Silas said, checking his watch. He pulled his retired detective badge from his pocket, holding it high as he moved toward the doors. "Keep your hands where they can see them, Albert. I'll talk to the lead officer. We have the wiretap receiver. We have the Cayman bank statements. And we have the kid's confession recorded on the receiver tape. We have enough to clear you and put Monica away for life." "Let them come," I said, looking down at the tiny transmitter bug in my hand. "I have the ledger, and it's time to read it to the court." The heavy double doors of the warehouse were kicked open, and a dozen armed officers flooded the room, their flashlights cutting through the dust and rain. The headlights of the police cruisers illuminated the wet, splintered deck, casting long shadows across the ruins of my past. The storm finally broke, leaving the Oregon sky a clear, pale blue, the clean scent of rain-washed pine needles filling the air. 2 weeks had passed since the night at the river gorge. I sat in a wooden rocking chair on the porch of a small, quiet cottage in Portland. The house was modest, surrounded by a small garden of lavender and roses, far from the sterile luxury of the house Monica had built with her blood money. Audrey had helped me find it, and we rented it together using her nursing salary and the remainder of my old pension, which had been legally restored once the state courts declared my sanity intact and lifted the fraudulent guardianship. My ribs were tightly bound under my flannel shirt, and my left arm was in a sling to support the healing collarbone. The physical pain was still there, a dull ache when the wind blew off the river, but it was a clean pain, the kind that reminded you that you were alive. On the night of the confrontation, Monica was dragged out of the warehouse in handcuffs, her screams echoing through the wet trees as the police cruisers lined the river road. The paramedics wrapped me in a thick, warm blanket, treating me for hypothermia and checking my broken ribs. 2 days later, Felix and Silas held a press conference outside the federal courthouse. The news stations broadcast the wiretap recording. Julian's own voice admitting to the staged suicide, the insurance fraud, and the basement confinement. The public outrage was immediate, and my name was cleared. Audrey walked out onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. She had her dark hair pulled back, her eyes bright and clear, the bruises on her face from that night having faded into thin yellow marks. She handed me a mug, sitting on the porch swing beside me. "The newspaper just arrived," she said, sliding the morning print onto my lap. "The final report on the liquidation came out." I looked down at the headline. The face of Julian Fontaine, or rather, Julian Bradford, looked back from the front page. The story had captivated the nation. The billionaire tycoon who had staged his own suicide, sacrificed his brother, collected a fraudulent insurance check, and spent a quarter of a century hiding his family in a basement, only to have his own father strip him of his fortune on the day of his greatest triumph. Fontaine Enterprises had collapsed like a house of cards. The board had filed for bankruptcy. The IPO shares were worthless, and the SEC was currently winding down the remains of the corporate assets to pay off the defrauded creditors. But the $200 million was safe. Under the Federal Reserve's final wire settlement rules, the transfer to the Seattle Children's Hospital Foundation stood. Julian's attorneys had tried to sue to recover the funds, but because I was the legally registered administrator of Blue Horizon Holdings, the sole trustee of the Sentinel Trust, the transfer was ruled a valid corporate donation. The hospital board of directors had sent me a letter last week, signed by the chief administrator, inviting Audrey and me to the ribbon-cutting ceremony next year. They wanted me to cut the ribbon, real ribbon this time, not a symbol of corporate greed. The hospital had already begun construction on the new Philip Bradford Pediatric Oncology Wing, ensuring my son's name would be remembered not for a tragic Zolsauer fire, but for saving thousands of children's lives. I smiled thinking about it. A wing built of brick and mortar, filled with doctors and nurses who would heal children, all funded by the money. Julian wanted to hide in Zurich. Monica's trial was set for next month. The wiretap recording Silas had secured, along with the bank statements from the Cayman Islands and the forged commitment papers signed by Dr. Finch, left her with no defense. She was facing 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy, insurance fraud, kidnapping, and elder abuse. Dr. Finch had already surrendered his medical license, pleading guilty to forgery and bribery in exchange for a 5-year sentence. The books were balanced. "You're quiet today, Grandpa," Audrey said, taking a sip of her tea. "Just looking at the numbers," I said, a soft smile touching my lips. "For 40 years, I audited other people's books. I looked at the credits, the debits, the assets, and the liabilities. I spent my life making sure the columns added up, believing that if you kept the records straight, the world would make sense. But I was wrong. The world doesn't follow the rules of double-entry bookkeeping. Sometimes the debt is too heavy, and the only way to balance the ledger is to tear the page out." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old black-and-white photograph I had kept in my shoe for 5 years. It was a picture of my wife, holding a baby Julian, with 10-year-old Philip standing beside them, holding a wooden model plane. They were all smiling, the sun bright behind them. I looked at Julian's baby face, then at Philip. The anger that had burned inside me for so long, the hot, clean rage that had carried me across 300 miles of rain and mud, was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving only a quiet, peaceful sadness. "What are you going to do with the photo?" Audrey asked gently. I took the photograph and placed it on the small wooden table beside my rocking chair, next to a fresh vase of lavender. I didn't hide it in my shoe anymore. I didn't need to protect it from the orderlies or the basement damp. "I'm going to leave it right here," I said, "where I can see them every morning." The sun began to sink below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the porch. The wind rustled the pine trees, carrying the soft, rhythmic hum of the city in the distance. I leaned back in the rocking chair, closed my eyes, and let the warmth wash over me. The audit was complete. The final entry had been written, the ledger was closed, and for the first time in 25 years, the balance was exactly 0.